Hello there, my name is Jared Mello, and this is Mello Mentoring, the new name of my channel. And I thought, what better way to celebrate the new name of my channel with going into a little bit of my background and my story of how I got here today and the reason why I've made this channel. And we'll go back all the way to high school up into the very present day. This might take a minute, so relax and get comfortable, but there's going to be a lot of good tidbits in here. So my story will begin, we'll say, in middle school, because that's right around the time I hit puberty and a lot of my anxiety began to surface for the first time. And it was social anxiety and a generalized anxiety. And I wouldn't wish those two things upon anyone, and I would characterize them as extreme insecurity, very uncomfortable in your own skin, being ultra aware of every little social nuance, and it can be quite painful, this awareness. And I just also had no belief in myself, and I had a good group of friends, but I ditched them in middle school because I thought they weren't cool enough. And then for the next 4 years, including high school, I was pretty much a loner, besides a friend here and there. And in high school, I was an extremely easy target for people to pick on and to bully because I had no belief in myself, I had no self-respect, and I wouldn't fight back. And a lot of people would laugh at me, make fun of me, and I would try to do anything to avoid this stuff, but it seemed like the more I would try to avoid it, the more likely it was to happen. And that high school was probably the worst, some of the worst years of my life, honestly. I didn't go to any JDD, junior dinner dance, no sophomore cotillion, no prom. I'd done a little bit in athletics, but my just overall mental illness and extreme lack of belief in myself and self-respect was just really getting in the way. And this is when I began to dabble with booze and dabble with weed in particular. And I don't necessarily think that weed for my developmental brain, especially with the mental illness, was good for me. But I was able to graduate high school, and I limped through, and I went off to college, went off to WVU, West Virginia University. And for anyone who knows about that place, for someone who has drinking tendencies, man, they'll come out to the extreme there. So I had a blast for about my first year. I was very happy to have shed my high school identity and try to establish myself as a new person in college, and I made some pretty good friends there. And yeah, we had some standard alcoholic type behavior, I guess is what we'll call it, and it wasn't so bad. I did good in my first year of college. I still had a lot of extreme anxiety and insecurity, but it was pretty much under wraps. But it wasn't until my sophomore year of college, or freshman year of college summer, that I had first found methadone first. And for those of you who don't know, methadone is a very powerful opiate that they give people who are on heroin or Percocets to help them get off of the drug. And I took it, and at first it was just making me a little nauseous, and it was too powerful. And I'd be messed up for like a couple days at a time from just taking one 40 milligram dose. But eventually, it soothed all of my problems completely. Anxiety, gone. Insecurity, gone. It would make me a little manic, if anything. And so that was the beginning of me falling in love with opiates. Albeit, I did it the complete opposite way you're supposed to. And I had my troubles when I went back to school sophomore year. I was coming in and out of methadone withdrawal. And basically, I caved in and started going to a methadone clinic because I was addicted to methadone. They didn't like that idea at first, but I talked them into it, and it was pretty, unfortunately, easy to talk them into. And things got a little bit better at first when I started going because it was easing all of my symptoms of drug use, and my mental illness was going away, or being masked, I should say, from the methadone. But eventually what happened was my winter break of my sophomore year, I was doing terrible in school at this point. I was just kind of becoming reckless, and I had to cold turkey from 55 milligrams of methadone. And that was probably the worst 3 weeks of my life, and it was December. I would be wearing winter jackets inside and completely irritable. And for those of you who don't already know, when you are using drugs to self-medicate a mental illness such as anxiety or depression or bipolar disorder, just because you stop doing the drug does not mean your mental illness will go away. Does not mean you'll just go back to normal and be fine. It's like, no. Now you're mentally ill, and your mental illness will resurface, except 3 times as powerful as it was before. And that's what would happen every single time. And I feel really bad for the people who are in this scenario, but that was exactly what happened to me. And everyone would say, you gotta be off of drugs. And I'd always say to them, if you only knew how I normally felt, and I didn't understand that I was mentally ill, and not many other people did either at first. But I got off this methadone, barely, and I went back to school. But instead, I got a loan refund check, and I just started doing OxyContin instead, blew all my money on that. And my parents took me out of school, signed me out, and they sent me to rehab. Now, at this time, I wasn't ready for rehab. I didn't even want to stop. I just knew I had found something that made me feel better, and I didn't recognize the fact that I was mentally ill. And I went to this place called Seabrook House, went there for 21 days, met all the wrong kinds of people in there, and my first day out is the first day I did heroin. And that started a nice little 6-month to 9-month spree on the drug, where I would be stealing. I became all of those things that you hear about, the junkie being, stealing, becoming a criminal, just all in order to get your next fix. And I eventually had gotten arrested, and I, at that point, had some of the drug on me, and I became a felon. And that really messed up my record for about 7 months, because all it takes in the state I'm in is possession of this drug to be a felony. Not good. So, and that didn't even stop me though at first. I still kept on doing the drug until eventually I found an addiction specialist who was trying out a new drug at the time called Suboxone. And I still didn't want to stop using the drugs, like heroin in particular, but I got on this Suboxone and it did something miraculous for me. It was helped me to actually be okay throughout the day, to not have to go down to Camden or any other drug spot, but I was able to live through the day. And it was masking my mental illnesses is what it was doing. And at first, it was a really good thing because it was the only thing that made me stop doing heroin. And I was so young at this point, my frontal lobe in my brain wasn't even developed. I'm probably about 21, 22 at the time. And it allowed me to finish college. I graduated from school, albeit I was still living half of a life, because once you get on Suboxone for a while, it doesn't make you high if you need it. But if someone who doesn't have any opiate tolerance were to take Suboxone, they'd get blitzed. But what did happen to me was I began to experience all of the negative side effects of opiates without the positive. So I'd be sleeping 14 to 16 hours a day, sleep driving on the way to school, and it was just a mess. And they'd also put me on a antipsychotic drug called Zyprexa. And this is what I was on for a little while, because they did finally diagnose me as bipolar. And I think it was bipolar 2. But between those two, Zyprexa and Suboxone, man, I was a wreck. I gained a ton of weight, sleep driving, and I'd actually gotten off of Zyprexa first because I was getting tired of all those side effects. And then, I was still doing dibble-dabbling with other drugs, though, too, for a while. I was doing coke, doing drinking, Xanax, and finally, I'd wrecked a couple cars in this time period, but I finally wrecked one more, and I said, that's enough. I got tired of it. When the pain was great enough, I decided to change, and I started to go to meetings, and I was still on Suboxone at first, and this is before there was a big controversy about whether Suboxone is clean or not. Thank goodness there wasn't a controversy about that then, because I was claiming clean time, but I don't really think it was in retrospect. But in retrospect also, it doesn't really matter. It was really only up to me and my sponsor and my higher power. So I was just on Suboxone for a while, and I was able to live that life. I was able to get by. And I didn't realize it, but again, it was masking my mental illnesses, my anxiety, and my bipolar. Until the negative side effects became too great, and I decided to get off. I got off of Suboxone, and guess what? The withdrawal from that was just as bad as any of the opiates, methadone, heroin, and I really struggled for about a few weeks. And thank goodness I had a support system of NA at the time, because if I didn't have that, my lord, I would have been in a world of trouble. But what had happened was my mental illnesses just came back stronger than ever. My anxiety through the roof, my uncomfortability in my own skin through the roof. And that's how it first portrayed itself. And then I finally started doing things kind of the right way. But that was only for a minute, because I'd gotten a girlfriend about 3 or 4 months after I got off of Suboxone. And I have a lot of codependent / love addiction tendencies, and they all came out with her. And for those of you who don't understand codependency / love addiction, codependent people, I think it's when it portrays itself in men, is the woman becomes your ego mirror, where you can't see good about yourself. You can't love yourself unless the person you care about loves you. But if they're mad at you and unhappy with you, you're unhappy and mad at yourself, because you need them to feel good about you, because that's where your sense of self-worth becomes. It's where it comes from. It comes from the person you care about. And it's not a healthy relationship. It's not a relationship at all, because the other person is just kind of using the other woman, or person in this case, to make themselves feel better. So I wasn't a whole person. I had no confidence, no belief in myself, unless someone gave me that belief in myself. And this woman, she had her problems too. Her boyfriend before me had committed suicide. And man, between the two of us, we both brought our own luggage to the table. But I became codependent enough, and as most people would know, eventually what happens is the woman will leave. We'll get tired of it, and they move on. And I had been doing well for multiple years, but just on Suboxone, and I had been off of Suboxone now for a few months. And this woman became my higher power. It's basically what happened. If she was okay with me, everything was good. If she was unhappy with me, my world was trash. And so I eventually began to drink a little bit again. And I was devastated when she had left me. And then I decided to really go back to NA after about maybe a week of drinking. And I decided, okay, I'm going to do this way of life the complete right way. Get a sponsor, work some steps, really pray, and see how it goes. But in reality, looking back at it, what I was really doing was trying to find a way to get better so I can get that girlfriend back. And for my sins, it did eventually happen that way, where I got her back, but wouldn't you know, it eventually ended. But I worked some steps, I got a sponsor, and some of the best things I learned from doing that in NA was I developed a relationship with a higher power. Not a specific religion, but just I began to pray and develop a relationship with a higher power. And prayer, in my experience, has absolutely worked. It gave me some self-awareness about my behaviors, my patterns, my defects, like what I normally do. And some of my defects and patterns took years and years to really unfold and see the pattern, but I was able to discover them. I began to see how selfish I was, how little I thought of other people before I spoke or did anything. And I learned a whole lot of good stuff in NA. And so when I finally broke up with this girl, believe it or not, I was able to stay good. I stayed clean through the whole thing. And I had a network, I had meetings I went to, and things were going all right. Although I later found out I wasn't really over her yet, because this codependent piece / love addiction piece has been the hardest thing for me to get over, because I've later discovered that women are really my drug of choice if I do have one. It wasn't drugs, it was women. And I think that's been a pretty difficult struggle, but we're getting ahead of ourselves here now. And so basically I was clean in NA for almost 4 years. And I'll tell people, if you want to get clean and you want to stop using, going to NA or AA and you follow their way of life will absolutely help you do that. But for me, I began to really have my mental illness resurface after several years, and the bipolar piece began to come out. And I'd been, dabbling with gambling, dabbling with caffeine, cigarettes, all the little mind and mood-altering substances I could use, and it just wasn't very good. And so eventually what happened was I started to try to find ways to cope with my anxiety, because I'd drink a coffee and a 5-hour energy, and I'd go through the roof with mania, and I'd feel great. And then when I got off, I'd feel terrible. And I was like, this is not right for me to be feeling so much better just from a 5-hour energy. It wasn't right. So it was my first clue that something else is wrong here. Because in NA, I was told I wasn't mentally ill. I was told I'm just an addict. That's it. But who were they to really say that? They're not doctors. They didn't know. But I listened because I was naive at the time. And I had to discover my own reality. I had to discover what works for me. And I discovered later that it wasn't everything they said, necessarily, that began to work for me. And like I said, I don't want to down-talk NA, but just for me, it made me a judgmental person, especially people that could drink normally, because I was extremely jealous of them. And it made me extremely self-critical. And I just began to see people as people who could drink and do drugs normally, and people who couldn't. And for me, it just wasn't very good. I also think they have a couple limiting beliefs that they put on themselves, like if you have a beer, you're going to go run to your drug of choice, heroin, or crack, or whatever. And I don't believe that either, because I think that what we continue to tell ourselves constantly becomes true. And one of the last great things I learned before I left NA, I went to this positive self-talk seminar about how to talk to yourself. And I began to realize the power of our thoughts, the power of what we think about ourselves and how that shapes our lives. And I really noticed, man, I just didn't have a good belief in myself. NA was able to help me get clean, but it didn't help me get a good belief in myself. And I needed other things to get that done. But in the process, I began experimenting also with supplements to help my anxiety and depression. I'd eventually found this drug-like substance, which was the reason why I left NA. And I don't really regret that decision at all at this point. I regret losing some friends over it, because now that I don't go to NA, the people there don't talk to me anymore because I kind of mess up their ideology. But overall, NA taught me a lot of great things, taught me a lot of great self-awareness, helped me develop a relationship with a higher power, and I had some good friends at the time. Those were all good things. The only other thing about NA I'm not really the biggest fan of is it did make me dependent on the meetings and the people there. And I don't like that dependency thing. And as we'll see here in a minute, being dependent on others is one of my biggest problems. And I had to find ways to get over that. But that was the end of my NA career, and I began experimenting with the supplements, etc. And, I began to drink again a little bit. And there was a couple times where my mental illness was flaring up, because, as those of you who know, if you're bipolar and you give yourself an antidepressant, and I was taking SAMe, before I noticed I was bipolar, those antidepressants make your mental illness or your bipolar disorder much worse. And so I began to rapid cycle through manias and then severe depressions, right? And I'd be extremely depressed. But even before this, just to backtrack a little bit, my bipolar disorder came out, bipolar 2, while I was still NA. And I was having suicidal idealizations, and the only thing I was really looking forward to in life was my next tattoo appointment. It was really that bad, where if it wasn't for that, I don't know if I might have tried to do it. But I got these tattoos. I had one thing outside of a woman that I was looking forward to, and that was it. And so I continued to get more and more tattoos, and it has helped. It's helped in a place in my life where it just nothing else was really helping. So, again, back to where I was in the story. I was taking all these supplements, and I didn't realize I was bipolar. I had to figure out, I had to get some mood stabilization. And I did a lot of trial and error with the supplements, which is what eventually everyone will have to do. And just be careful, though, if you're bipolar, because you have to have mood stabilizers. I found lithium orotate and GABA also served as a mood stabilizer. But without those, the bipolar disorder will get worse and worse and worse. But once I left NA and I started doing this routine, I had some pretty dark times there for a minute. And when I was in mania, I would become hypersexual in some cases and do some pretty obnoxious things via text And I had a lot of guilt and shame over those activities that I did, the sexting stuff, sometimes without even permission. And it was an awful feeling. And I was pretty close to trying to jump off the nearest bridge a couple times. But I held on. I used my relationship with a higher power. I used the friends that I still had that I did talk to, because I learned to talk to people about how I feel. Talk to people about my feelings, because if you don't talk about how you feel, often we will try to change how we feel, which is also true. So I came out through this supplement experimentation period, and I was able to get, finally, a routine that works for me. And throughout all of this, I actually did go back to school again to become an LPC. But I took 3 of the courses in the Masters of Mental Health Counseling program so I could become a coach, which I am today. And throughout this whole time, though, I had gone on breaks of dating, not dating, and I had thought that I was doing all right with my codependency / love addiction. But I just found out recently, nope, not doing all right. Because what I've been doing hasn't been working. When I like a woman, they never like me back. So I'm like, well, I'm not perfect. I need to continue to grow. And just yesterday, I decided to put myself on a 6-month dating ban, where I'm not going to talk to women, try to have sex, try to date, nothing. I think I've been trying to avoid this for a while, but I needed to stop because I needed to allow a woman to not be like a drug for me. I need to be completely okay by myself. And like I said, I don't go to NA anymore. I'll do drink a little bit from time to time. And I've had kratom before too from time to time. But to me, all of this stuff now, it's about mindset. It's like, I have this. I'm big into working out. That's something I developed about 10 years ago. Huge into working out. And I like how mindset plays a role into the workouts as well. Even that is, as the Navy SEALs say, 80% mental, 20% physical. And I have some goals now in my life too. I want to build my channel here. I want to have a podcast at some point. I want to do coaching. I drive Uber now. I'm making investments. I'm planning for my future. And it hasn't been at all a clear shot upwards path. But I've been able to try to help others. Use my experience, use the things I've learned to try to help others. Because I've had a lot of experience with drugs, with mental illness, with gambling, with relationships, codependency, love addiction. And like I said, this love addiction, codependency thing, it's been the last hurdle that I've really got to get right. Because it's probably the only piece of my life that's missing right now is having a healthy relationship. And I haven't been able to do it. And rather than think that every woman is wrong, I'm going to take a look at myself and say, hey, I'm the common denominator of all those relationships, so it must be me. It must be something I'm not doing correctly, and that's how I'm going to address it. That's what I would do if I talked to my clients. I'd say, hey, we can only work with what you're doing, so let's see what we can do with this. And so overall, I really want to make a distinction for the people, because there are certain people who absolutely do need something like NA because they can't stop using, right? And without NA, they'll fall off the deep end and they'll go right back to their old way of life, and it ends in jails, institutions, and death for those kinds of people. But to me, in my experience, if we started using drugs because we were self-medicating an untreated mental illness, that puts you in a different category. Like that, you're not quite the same as those people. You're very similar, but it's not quite the same. And it needs to be dressed a little bit differently. Because like I said, the only really negative thing that NA did to me was they said to me, some of the people, that I wasn't mentally ill, that I was just an addict. And that wasn't true, right? Because they're not doctors. But overall, I'm very grateful for my NA experience, and it did do some good things for me for a while, but I'm pretty happy where I am now, outside of my relationship predicament. And I discovered that there too. I just wasn't willing at the time to not look to have sex, to not look to date. But that's where I am now. And I've had a lot of great experiences in my life. I've been able to spend a couple weeks with the author Neil Strauss. I've been able to talk to Jordan Peterson on the phone for 45 minutes. And one of the best podcasts I've listened to that really helped my mindset when I left NA was listening to Joe Rogan. He really turned my mindset around in regards to like drinking and drugs. And I don't like weed, but he does. But it helped me to get a grasp of it, to say, yeah, like, here he is having some fun, rocking and rolling, but he's still super successful. He's still super productive. And it was amazing to hear. Absolutely amazing. And so, if I had to go back and change anything, I probably wouldn't, because all these bumps and bruises have made me the person I am today. The calm sea never made a skilled sailor. And I'm nowhere near a finished product right now. The growth always must continue. And right now I'm on this journey of 6 months of no dating. And it's going to be a struggle, I bet. I'm not used to doing this. But what I had been doing hadn't been working, so I got to try something different. I'm 33 years old. I had some pretty unique experiences. I'm going to continue making YouTube videos. I'd love to hear what kind of videos or topics you would like to see me make videos on. I have a few in the back of my mind. And hey, I'm on the ride of life right now. I'm on this journey. My suicidal idealizations have almost gone down to zero. I think pretty much have gone down to zero. I'm pretty lucky at this point. I'm pretty lucky to have the friends I have. And I'm lucky to have made it through to this point and to find this supplement routine I have that's completely changed my life. I'm so lucky, because a lot of people don't ever find that stuff out. They don't ever find the routine that works for them. And being mentally ill with anxiety and bipolar 2, if it's not treated, my ceiling lowers. I won't be able to reach my fullest potential. And yeah, I was able to live 4 years almost. I lived with untreated mental illness while using no drugs or alcohol, but my ceiling was most certainly lower in those times. I had to get it treated so I could reach my fullest potential. And if you have any questions about my story here, please feel free to reach out. I'd love to answer questions. I'd love to discuss supplements with you or other addiction/mental illness stuff. Or even relationship stuff, although I'm on square one with the relationships again myself. So, thanks for letting me share. Again, this is Jared Mello with Mello Mentoring. Thank you.